When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Allie Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Hello, insatiable listeners. Before we get to today's episode, I want to put a trigger warning on our episode. Around minute 5 of the interview, or the second question that I ask Ashley, we do discuss her sexual assault. So if this is something that can be triggering, upsetting to you, you'll want to skip over that part. Again, it's the second question into the interview, and it's about 5 minutes. If this is triggering, I would skip minute 5 through 10 of the interview, and then you can hop in. You'll still get so much from the interview, and we don't go back to that piece of her story in the interview. All right, enjoy today's episode. Welcome, everybody, to Season 8, Episode 4 of Insatiable. This season's theme is consistency. It's no secret that consistency is the key to success. Many of us have so much health knowledge and are aware of the latest and greatest food research and have the best of intentions, and then real life happens. Here we fall off track, lose motivation, and get discouraged. Convention tells us consistency is about willpower, discipline, and hard work. But research in adult development theory points elsewhere. 15 years ago, I discovered functional medicine and reversed my irritable bowel syndrome, depression, and a host of issues. I was amazed at the power of food as medicine and felt amazing. But even with all of these great results, it couldn't stop my binging and overeating. My quest was to discover, why can't I stick with this? Led me to grad school to study adult development and how we really change ingrained patterns and behaviors. I came to realize inconsistency is a symptom, just like depression and binging. It's not the problem, but has various root causes depending on the individual. Not only is falling off track an invitation into deeper healing and radical results, I found that when it comes to consistency, a lot of the common beliefs we have around being consistent are what actually causes us to fall off track. In this Insatiable season, we will look at inconsistency as a symptom, not a problem. We'll explore what happens after the novelty of some, quote, new plan, diet, or self-care has worn off and why real life trips us up. What are the various root causes of why we lose motivation, want to be bad with our food and self-care, and tell ourselves, chuck it, F it. Most of our behavior change in self-help, it targets our brain and thoughts. Yet our ability to think clearly instead of catastrophizing or spiraling so that we can make good, clear choices rests largely on the state of your nervous system. If you feel unsafe physically or emotionally, you click into all or nothing thinking because your nervous system is getting you to focus. The challenge is our nervous system doesn't know the difference between real and perceived threats if we've never worked through our past pain and trauma. One of the ways we can start to have space to explore perceived threats, have better discernment, and greater choice is regulating our breath. It sounds simple, but it is definitely not easy, which is why I wanted to have our remarkable guest, Ashley Neese, on today. I wanted to talk to Ashley about how breathwork can help us resolve the root cause of our hard-to-break habits, how breathwork helps us be in choice around our emotions, and why this is more important than control, in simple, accessible ways to integrate breathwork into your life. Ashley is a renowned breathworker, teacher, and author of a great, beautiful new book called How to Breathe, which I've been totally loving and using and benefiting from. She has studied with some of the world's leading masters in yoga, meditation, medical intuition, and somatic therapy. Ashley draws from this deep well of resources to guide people back into their bodies, where they learn beyond the cognitive mind how to cultivate resilience, develop relational intelligence, and trust the wisdom held within. Her passion lies in the belief that our deepest and most profound healing occurs when we learn to listen to the unique language of our bodies. She's in private practice in California. Thank you for being here, Ashley.
Thank you so much for having me, Allie.
Yeah, everyone is just going to love this. I've been hearing about breath work in the ether, on the fringe of my awareness, and feel like your book is really going to help make it more accessible and mainstream. So thank you so much for being here for this conversation. So in a lot of interviews, you shared how you came to breath work through your recovery path from drugs and alcohol. And on Unsatiable, we love to get to the root causes of things. And so how did you understand your addiction at 21 versus where you are today, where you understand root causes?
This is a great question, Allie, and one that I'm very passionate about. And to start off, I just want to say for anyone listening that I do not speak for AA or any 12-step programs. I'm just going to kind of share my own personal experience, really in the hopes that it helps somebody listening who might be in a similar place that I was when I got sober, and also the ways in which my understanding of addiction has really evolved and expanded over the last 18 years, which I still can't even believe I've been sober for that long. It makes me feel very old. But anyway, these days I really choose not to drink or get high as a way to stay grounded and to stay in my body. The idea that I was presented with at 21 when I went to rehab was the very prevalent model that's still kind of out there today, which that addiction is a disease. So it's the disease model of addiction. And the traditional medical model of disease basically requires that any abnormal condition be present in a person that causes some kind of discomfort or distress or dysfunction to the person who's suffering. So that's the typical model that's out there. And that's also in some ways the model that AA uses. So the main treatments that I was involved with when I was 21 were group therapy, individual therapy, lots of 12-step meetings, and of course working with a 12-step sponsor. And it was all kind of under this premise of this disease model of addiction. And at the time that worked really, really well for me. Like I said, I was 21 when I got sober. I was really young, and there's a way in which we talk about addiction, and this is true with trauma as well, but when we start drinking, and I started drinking around 13, a lot of my development stopped, right? So a lot of my emotional development, a lot of my relational development stopped at that point. So when I got into the rooms of AA and into rehab at 21, I was stunted in many ways, and I needed to learn how to, through a lot of cognitive processes, how to identify, for example, destructive behaviors. I needed to learn how to face my fears. I needed to learn how to take responsibility for my life. I needed to learn how to kind of accept that there was a bigger purpose for my life. And these things didn't all happen in the first day of my recovery or even in the first 10 years, but these were really the building blocks for how I worked with that disease model of addiction at that time. And all of those pieces were really helpful for me. And after listening to your podcast, so many episodes, especially this last week, I know that this is a big piece of all the work that we're doing. It's like we have to identify what are the markers of our destructive behaviors. We need to be taking inventory daily of what are we thinking about? What are we feeling? What are we eating? Just really looking at those pieces. And being in a 12-step program gave me all those tools that I did not have. The other thing that I want to say about my personal experience with AA that was so powerful is the group energy, right? And being in the group. And I never really had a safe kind of core group of people growing up. And so being in community, healing in community was really, really powerful for me. I really needed what they call that fellowship of other addicts and alcoholics. And I needed to be around people my own age who were trying to do something different with their life. Because back then at 21, I didn't really know anyone my age who was sober, and I would go to meetings and everyone was like, at the time I was like, if you're 30, you're ancient. Right? So I just thought everybody was so old and weird. And I really needed to seek out other young people who were kind of, making these big choices to make this life change. And so today, the kind of idea of the disease model of addiction doesn't sit with me in the same way, because what I've learned through my own life is that addiction is much more nuanced than just labeling it like an abnormal medical condition. In my experience, long-term recovery has to include the body as part of a treatment plan and the lifestyle changes. So in order to have a sustainable recovery, we need to be looking at the whole person, not just this kind of cognitive model or spiritual model, but we also have to include the body.
Yeah, I love, first of all, I love the care and consideration you give with how helpful AA was and what it offered. We did last season kind of a pros and cons of various healing and food approaches. And the main takeaway for people is each of these is a tool. None of it is like the final destination, right? Like the elimination diet, like all these different things that we try. And I think the same is what you're describing with AA, is that it was super helpful and it was an important step. And you can still go further than that or take another step or another direction. Doesn't mean that that's not valid or hasn't been, but it doesn't have to be the be all end all in a way.
That's exactly right. And honestly, the way I look at we'll get to this next, but I don't really even, I don't use the term alcoholic or addict when I'm talking about myself anymore. But the way that I understand addiction for me personally is it's really was rooted in a lack of stability that like wasn't present in my early years and my, what I call a compromised capacity for self-regulation. So not having any capacity to self-regulate at a very young age and growing up in a home that was very unstable. I was searching to feel regulated. I wanted to feel ease in my body from a very young age. I just remember feeling so disorganized and so insecure and so afraid and just like terrified of everything and everyone. And our bodies are always looking for regulation. They're looking for ease. They're seeking comfort. And at the time, the only way that I knew how to do that, the only tools I had access to, given the house I grew up in, was to use substances. Like that's what I saw the people around me do. And so I'm like, oh, well, this is how you get through life. This is the medicine. And, most people who are in the addiction get to a point where the medicine stops working because it just ends up causing more problems than it's solving in a way. And that's where things get, people talk about hitting, bottom and things like that. But really for me, the core of my addiction and the root of it came from being so dysregulated when I was young.
Well, and you bring up such a great point, and in such a different context that I don't think people are used to hearing, is that yes, the body is trying to regulate with ease and comfort. And when we typically hear that, we think of that as a bad thing. Like, well, life isn't easy, or food is comfort, or alcohol is comfort. But comfort is often what's familiar. And I know a lot of my clients had very unstable homes growing up, whether it was through financial, through divorce, through neglect, and not realizing that trying to like self-regulate, to your point of you're looking for that ease and comfort, but sometimes that you don't have a good foundation or compass to lock into. And so we use these other things that they're making us comfortable in the moment, but not long term. But it's the body is trying to look for that stability. And I love that you bring that up. So it's such a interesting point that I don't think most people think about when they think of ease. Like they think that's a bad thing, right?
Yeah, they do. And, I hear this a lot from people too. And I'll hear this from clients like, oh, I just can't stop. Like, I know this food isn't good for me, but I just can't stop eating it. And for me, when I was young, it was like, I know snorting Coke and drinking and being out all night isn't good for me, but I just can't stop. And every attempt I had to change, I couldn't, because like when I'm looking at it now, it was terrifying for me to give up the ways that I was trying to find ease. So when you take away the thing that is bringing me ease, even though there's all this pain and all this shame and all this like hurt around it, it's still really hard to give up because like you said, that's what's comfortable, that's what's known. And so really you're asking us all to like, and not you, but these questions of like change are asking us to step into the unknown and get a little bit uncomfortable so that we can then find that comfort in a way that's healthy and regulated and safe.
Yeah. And so speaking of the unknown and getting to a more inner sense of safety, I love that you talk about no longer identifying as, an alcoholic, because that's something, as someone who is a cancer survivor, that label I know gives a lot of people strength, but I don't like identify with that in the sense that like now I know cancer is a symptom of like environmental pollution and all these, even though obviously I went through treatment for it. And even the idea of survivor is, I get how that was useful for me at one time, but I want to be someone who thrives now and who isn't only defined by that, even though it's been an important part of my life. I don't want that identity and the lack of safety it created to rule my life. And so to like kind of leave these identities that were helpful at one time, but no longer, to access this level of freedom, we have to transcend old identities that, again, were at once useful, but it requires reclaiming and cultivating inner safety. And you had shared about coming to terms with being raped at gunpoint, which is probably one of the most dangerous experiences of your life, in which for a long time you blame yourself for. And I see this with a lot of clients, and even in my own healing journey, the self-blame that comes from being victimized and traumatized. And so can you talk about how in working through this experience and how breath work was so important in that experience, helping you fully heal and get to better levels of freedom and ease and comfort within yourself?
Yes.
That was a big question.
It's beautiful and it's big, and I'm just going to give myself a moment to pause and just sit with that. It's big, and I've done a lot of work around this. So I really struggled with self-blame for many years around being raped, because I was raped when I was in the middle of a 3-day cocaine bender. And at the time, it was incredibly challenging for me to come to terms with forgiving myself, because I felt so strongly that if I hadn't been high, then that situation would never have happened. Right? And that was my thinking around it for so long. And while I understand that that isn't true today, at the time, the self-blame was a coping strategy. And it was a way that I tried to keep myself safe and to try to really contain the shame that I had around being raped. And I was really, really hard on myself, but what I was trying to do was kind of contain all of the shame. And it took me a long time to work through the self-blame piece. And, sexual assault, while under the influence of substances in somatic psychotherapy, is considered a very complex trauma. And complex trauma can only be worked through very, very slowly, very titrated, one layer at a time. So it wasn't the kind of situation where I could go in and have one therapy session and, be done, or I could go in and do one breathing session and release, this experience and then be done. It took a long time, because there's a lot of pieces to that. And I wasn't really able to stop blaming myself until I processed through what I call the stagnant energy in my body that was trapped from not being able to fight back while the rape was happening. And so this is something that happens in trauma. We have these different responses. We have fight or flight, we have freeze collapse. And in that scenario, I was high. I was being forced to have sex with this person at gunpoint, and it wasn't safe for me to fight back. I didn't have the energy to fight back. And then also I wasn't fully even in my body in that moment. And so it's really hard to fight back when you're not present and you're not fully embodied. And so I had to work through all of these complex pieces and get down to that energy that was trapped in my nervous system, that actually wanted to fight, that had an impulse to fight, but that I couldn't actually connect to that impulse in the moment. And once I was able to connect to that impulse, I was able to discharge the energy in a very safe and a very contained way. And then my system completely reorganized. And once my system reorganized, I was really able to see clearly that it wasn't my fault. And then I could finally move into all the different stages of grief and anger and, all the deep feelings that never really had a chance to surface in a way that moved toward healing, right? So those things would come up and it would always go right back to the shame, and that I would just try to keep a lid on it. But once I actually moved through that energy and was able to go through the motions of fighting back and giving my nervous system what it needed, I was able to have real healing. And this is a piece that is so important, because I think that there's so much rhetoric and there are so many ideas in our culture that we can't ever fully heal down to the root. And that's actually not true. That's not true. Breathwork for me was an integral part of all the work that I did at that time, because it guided me into my body and into the sensations. And when we're working with trauma, we're always working with sensations. We're working with affect. We're working with memory. We're working with, a lot of different pieces. But the sensations were really, really important for me to work with. And, I'll say one more quick thing about that. Up until I worked with this piece of trauma and really moved it and discharged it, I had a very intense breath holding pattern. When I would get stressed, I would just stop breathing, completely stop breathing. And I didn't even really know it, because it was just so ingrained in me. I had no idea, no consciousness around it. And when I moved through this piece, that totally shifted and I stopped holding my breath.
Wow. I am just my mouth is you can't see me because we're not on video, but dropped. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for sharing that. And also doing the work so you could articulate it like you did, because it was so clear and it was so nuanced and yet clear, which is hard to do. And yeah, I mean, I'm just like in awe of your ability to go through that, through the healing process of that, and come out and say, we can get through this, right? You can get things at the root. And I think especially for listeners to hear how so much of the self-blame and all of the stuff that in traditional coaching and self-development, we're told to get over ourselves instead of realizing that that's pretty protective, right? There's a pretty brilliant system going on. And it's like, oh my God. And you just gave us such an exquisite example. So again, thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Thank you for holding the space for that and for creating a podcast and a community where we can talk about these things. You know, I mean, God, when I was 21, I wish I had your podcast, you know? Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, as a healer, part of the healing work is helping people. That gives us meaning to what we went through. So one of the things that I love about your book is so approachable and friendly and forgiving, yet also gives us enough structure so we don't like lose ourselves into like, well, what do I do now? Because some of this, let's be honest, some of this hippie stuff can be like, what? You know, it's like, just feel, okay, what? You know, but one of the things you said that I think is so important for people is about when you're dealing with trauma or past pain, you have to go slowly and you have to titrate, because if not, you can overwhelm your system and re-traumatize yourself. So you said breath work was integral to this. And that's one of the things I think I really learned from your book is how helpful breath work can not only be in the day-to-day, but the deeper level of healing that's happening because we're going slow and it's gentle. So let's define breath work for people, and how does it make us feel safe in our body?
So the way that I typically describe breath work, which again, to your point of the book's accessibility, that was a really important piece for me in writing the book and in sharing about this work, because it is really deep and it's really profound and it can get woo really fast. So like real fast. And my intention with the book was really, how can I toe that line? How can I touch into spirit? How can I touch into these deeper layers and, you know, create a conversation around it, create space for it? And also, how can I keep this so practical that, you know, my mom could pick it up and start a practice right now? Like those were the pieces that I was holding. And it's kind of a lot to hold when you're writing a book. I think usually people are going in one direction or the other. They're going to keep it super simple or super deep, you know? Yeah. And so anyway, I appreciate the way that you articulated that, because that was a big intention of mine with this book. And I mean, the way that I typically define breath work is that it's a very general term for a range of methods that when we practice with an awareness will have a lot of benefit. So that benefit could be emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual. And essentially, breath work is breathing that is practiced with mindfulness. So conscious breathing, breath awareness, those are all really good ways to define breath work. Breath work, what I find so amazing about it is that the breath is the foundation of every single mindfulness practice. You can't hit a mindfulness practice without looking at the breath. So we can look at yoga, we can look at Qigong, we can look at Chinese medicine, we can look at energy medicine, all these different healing practices. They all have some connection with the breath. And for me, the piece about grounding is that it's impossible to feel safe in our bodies. It's impossible to be present if we're not actually here in our body. You know, one of the questions I'll ask my clients, especially if I've noticed that they're in a state of arousal activation, we'll do some, you know, neocortex work to kind of bring them back in, you know, back to planet Earth. And I'll say, what percentage of you is here right now? What percentage of you is in the room right now? And that's a really good question to help people start to come back. Oh, I'm 10% here. Oh, okay, let's take a few more breaths. Exhale. Okay, I'm 50% here. You know, and let's just gently work our way back. But we cannot feel safe in our body if we're somewhere else. It's not possible.
That is such an amazing question. Because I think a lot of times when we're getting back into our body, it's like, what does that mean? If I'm crying, am I in my body? Or if I'm hungry, am I in my body? But that internal reflection and just gathering our presence almost from, is your mind at like the doctor's appointment you were at with your husband today? Or is your mind at that work meeting? It's like, let's get back here and be present and be here now, which I think is a great starting point. And one of the things that I thought was so interesting, and you kind of hinted at, well, not hinted, but you talked about how like you didn't even realize you were holding your breath when you would be stressed, and because it was so normalized. And one of the things you really emphasize in your book and in your work is the exhale. Because again, I think everyone's like, well, I'm breathing, right? And maybe we know when we're in yoga that we're breathing deeply. But as I've been practicing your exercises, I'm like, oh my God, my exhale is it's hard. Like, so can you talk a little bit about the exhale and why it's so important in calming our nervous system down? We've got some science geeks in the crowd, so they'll love to hear about the diaphragm.
Yes. Yeah. I'm a big fan of the exhale. There's a whole section on it in the book because it's something that for me personally was a big growth hurdle, and a big challenge for me to work with. And it was definitely my edge. I had kind of no problem taking a super deep inhale, and then I would come to exhale and I'd be like, where did it all go? Like, I don't even understand what's happening. It's like, I took in all this oxygen, like, where's the carbon dioxide? It's literally gone. And it would all just come out so fast. And I didn't really have the ability to really slow it down and lengthen it, because the thing is, our exhale is directly connected to our parasympathetic nervous system, and the inhale is connected to sympathetic nervous system. So when we're working with the exhale, we're working directly with our parasympathetic state. And for me, someone who comes from being on kind of this high alert for much of my life, and then spending the better part of the last 18 years learning how to come home to my body, breathe, slow down, do all these different pieces, the exhale has been a big focus for me in terms of learning how to self-regulate. And so in very simple terms, the exhale is connected to the parasympathetic system, which is why it is so important. And this doesn't mean that it's not important to be aware of your inhale or even work with your sympathetic nervous system. This isn't discounting or not including those pieces, but just for the sake of focus, and also for the sake of, I would say 99.9% of all the clients and students I've worked with over the years have needed to focus on this practice specifically.
Yeah, I was telling a client of mine, because she's having trouble slowing down, and she's come so far and she has some big decisions to make, and she doesn't want to get back into the old patterns of kind of like just jumping into them. And I was like, you should try some breath work. I was like, I'm reading this woman, Ashley Neese's book. It's amazing. And I was like, I'll send you some of the exercises that, you had shared on Goop and stuff like that. And I was like, the big emphasis I want you to pay attention to is the exhale. And she talks about this, and she's the one who got me to think about it. I'm like, because most people don't exhale. And my client, she got like the emotional and spiritual metaphor immediately. She's like, oh, that's me. I'm always inhaling, never exhaling, never exhaling. And I was like, yeah, that's why I want you to try this. So yeah. I think it's such a great metaphor on so many levels. So thanks for highlighting that for all of us, because I think we're like, oh, we're breathing. It's just mostly inhale. I love where did it all go? That's what I was wondering. I'm like, how can I breathe so deeply? And then I'm out of breath as I exhale. Like, I'll exhale for 4 seconds, then I have to catch my breath again. It's crazy what I'm learning. And so in activating our parasympathetic nervous system, we become less reactive and less on high alert. And so I love that you're drawing this connection to emotional intelligence, which we traditionally think of in the organizational industrial psychology range, or, it's Daniel Pink or Dr. Susan David reading this about, how we can be better at work and with our families. And I don't think we typically think of emotional intelligence as a healing tool. And yet it's a lot of the work that I do with clients, and I know it is with you. And so why is emotional intelligence important to our health?
This is a great question. And I'm appreciating everything that you're saying so much. Yeah, we are relational creatures. We're relational creatures. We are designed to be in relationship, not only with ourselves, but with each other and in communities. And this is a really, really, really big piece. And most of the folks that I've worked with over the years, and when I say people I've worked with, I'm also including myself in that, because I have done everything that I'm teaching, everything that I'm guiding, everything that I'm saying. You better believe I've done it times 1,000 before I will even share it with anybody else. It's so important for me to be actively in this work, growing, expanding, and just keep going. So I'll say that. But the emotional intelligence piece is so key, because we need to know how to relate to ourselves and how to relate to each other. And one of the ways that I've really accessed that in my life and work is through breath work. And as I have become more regulated and have had more capacity to even go into some of those higher states of anger and rage and those kinds of things in a safe way, right? Without kind of flying off the handle, but being able to really contain my life force. It has opened me up to be able to connect with people in a way that is so much more powerful than how I was connecting before. I work with a lot of clients on differentiating. And this is a huge, huge issue, especially for those of us who grew up in households where there were zero boundaries, right? And I come from a very boundaryless family, very typical kind of Southern Jewish family where everyone's in everybody's business. And if you kind of step outside of that, the whole family is like wondering what's going on. And, there is a level of care and concern there, but there's also a level of like, if you kind of veer off the track, then everyone's going to be upset. When you grow up in a situation like that where there's no boundaries, it's really hard to understand what's my feeling, what somebody else is feeling. And emotional intelligence has a lot to do with this. It has a lot to do with being able to differentiate. Oh, that person's angry. Okay, I don't have to take that on. I don't have to be responsible for that. I don't have to fix that. I can just be here in my body and they can be angry. And this has taken a long time for me to be able to get to this place because I was so connected and so enmeshed with my family of origin and then so enmeshed with every partner and most relationships I've had growing up that when somebody would be upset or when they would be depressed or anything was going on, I was either taking it on for them and trying to fix it, or I was trying to take care of them and trying to fix them. And the thing is, I wasn't comfortable because I was so used to tuning into everybody else's needs. When you grow up in the dysfunction of alcoholism and all those things and codependence, it's like, as a child, you're just like, okay, well, there's no parent here that's regulated. So I become the regulator, right? I became the whole regulator for my family system. And when you are a regulator at such a young age, it takes a lot of undoing to kind of unpack those layers and go, oh, I'm my own person. My dad can be drinking and I don't have to do anything about it. Like I can feel sad and I can wish it was different, but I don't have to fix him. I don't have to get good grades. I don't have to do all these things to like make him love me and make him be different because I can't. And like all the stuff that I'm talking about, this differentiation, this really learning how to be my own person in my own energy field and my own emotional field has come from all the breath work and being able to really lean into my emotional intelligence and grow that part of my system, which I would say that I was highly kind of emotionally attuned, when I was young, like very sensitive, very empathic, like feeler of everyone around me, could read the energy of somebody like all the way across the street and down the hall, like knew what was going on, but didn't have a way to filter that, right? And the emotional intelligence has given me a way to filter and process and really understand, like, where do I end and where does somebody else begin?
That is such an amazing example because what a lot of my clients come to realize is that they're eating to get back into their body to feel grounded because they are doing, this podcast and in my work, one of the patterns that we work on breaking is the accommodator pattern. And it is very much, the accommodator tries to take on fix all that kind of stuff. And then you want the kind of how it translates food wise is then you want like food to reward yourself. It's like, well, I just went through that, and it didn't work or whatnot. But I love what you're describing because what you're saying is, okay, my dad can still be angry or this can still be happening. So it's not about control, but it's about choice. Yeah. And I'm always trying to emphasize that with people because people will come to me, I feel out of control around food. I feel out of control around my life. And they're like, I know I can't control other people. I know I can't control this. And I'm like, you actually don't even need to control it. It's about that, what you're calling regulation. I call it discernment of like, I have choices here. And when our nervous system is jacked up, we can only see the all or nothing because your nervous system doesn't want you to think in nuance, right? Or like thinking through it. Like, make a choice.
Because it can't. Like when we're in sympathetic charge and when we're activated, it's only black and white. That's all that's available. And like what you're talking about choice, I love that. And, I use a similar languaging with my clients. And one of my biggest goals is like, let's broaden that menu of options. And when we're able to downshift and go more into a parasympathetic state, our menu of options expands. And we're like, oh, I've got like 10 choices instead of all or nothing, right?
Yeah. And that's the freedom we're craving.
Yes.
I loved how you, in one interview, you said the breath won't change the content of what's happening, but the feeling that the contents are dangerous. And I think that's so clear and liberating for people. Like, oh, it's not that I have to change all my thoughts and reframe, and that can be helpful at times. But the first step is like, wait, is this as dangerous as as it feels and as I'm thinking about it in terms of black and white?
Yeah, that's such a good point. And that's, I think too, as a culture, we're kind of obsessed with, and this is all comes from analyst psychology and, our whole history with psychology, but we're kind of obsessed with narrative, right? We're so obsessed with the narrative. And like, we know this from science and research now that every time we tell the story, it's different, right? And you can have 6 people in a room and each person is going to remember that experience differently. And so this idea that like the narrative is like the truth is really problematic because it's elusive and it's shifting. And as we heal, our memories change too. And I've seen this. It's like we can, when I first was sober, it's like I would look back at my childhood and it would just be all dark, right? And it was like, oh, everything was hard and it was bad and it was this and it was that. And I look back all these years later and yeah, there were a lot of hard times, but I also can see the joy and the love and the beauty that was also present. And like we've been talking a lot in this interview about the nuanced of things. And I think that that's a really important piece too, is really being able to see all the different shades of gray.
Yeah, that process happens to my clients too, as well as starting to be. And I mean, I kind of hypothesized, and I'm sure I could find research to back this up, but your system is trying to abstract like from these experiences to keep you safe. And so if you don't heal, it keeps abstracting further and further because then you see like 20 years out, like I talk about, like uncertainty became very dangerous for me at 13 when I went through cancer. But then because I didn't know to heal that pattern or look at it, it was like by the time I was 25, anything that was uncertain became this big downward spiral for me because the feeling overpowered me in a way. I'm not being super clear, but like it's just the feeling will grow and you'll have less resilience and around it and less choice around it the longer it goes on. And then that reflects how you review the past. I love that you said that the past does change as we change in the present. It's kind of super trippy. I mean, I could talk about that for like 3 podcasts.
It is. And just to your point, because what you said was so beautiful. And another way to articulate that, because, you said, I want you to, I'm not sure if you're understanding me. And I was understanding you like 100%. It made so much sense to me. But what happens, so you're talking about this and kind of feeling unsafe in the nervous system and when your body's feeling unsafe. And so and this is like about the nervous system. So when there is an arousal level in the nervous system and we feel unsafe, right? So that happens. When that happens again, it connects or couples with the last time it happened. And so let's say you have an unsafe experience and that doesn't get worked on or healed. The next time you have an unsafe experience, it connects to that one. The next time you have an unsafe experience and you feel that activation in your nervous system, it connects to the last 3. Right. And so what's happening is all those dots are connecting, which is why when I would look back at my childhood, it was like all I could see were all those dots connecting all the pain, right? Or all the ways that I felt unsafe. But the thing is, because they're all connected, it's like this amazing domino effect. And that's why when I work with clients, I love to work with this concept of layers, because as we just remove one layer, the whole pattern reorganizes. It has to, because it can't stay in the same stagnant place anymore. When you move one piece, the whole thing shifts.
It's that time of year again. The live version of my annual group program, Why Am I Eating This Now?, opens for registration August 5th and begins August 13th. This program will help you unlock your keys to consistency with your nutrition goals. And with a small group of 15 people, we will get to the root causes of why you fall off track. Together, we'll transform those patterns and behaviors, no willpower required. To learn more, check out episode 6, season 5, where Why Am I Eating This Now participants, Dr. Tina Bugren and Lourdes Brawley, discuss how using adult development theory, which is not therapy or coaching, made the program so challenging, life-changing, and different from anything they've done before. A year later, they're still seeing results, impact, and feeling further transformed. Here's what they shared. Dr. Bugren said, "Why Am I Eating This Now is about getting to the root of things, not hovering on the surface as too many other programs' plans do. As a result, I stopped slipping with my healthy eating and falling into old thought patterns. I got unstuck and have the tools to keep going. 1 year out of the Why Am I Eating This Now process and using the tools, I've lost 20 pounds and kept them off." Lorda shared, I joined Why Am I Eating This Now because I wanted to move forward in my own self-development. I was able to discover the deeper conflict around my food battle, including how it protects me and how to move forward. I exceeded my own expectations for my progress, was challenged, and I will continue to make these changes in my life. I have been binge-free for over a year post Why Am I Eating This Now. I truly thought I'd never break free from emotional eating, but I have. And I am much bolder in my life. Yes, win-win. If you're ready to work smarter, not harder, to be consistent and reach your nutrition and wellness goals, join us. Full details are at alishapiro.com. Why Am I Eating This Now live program? And make sure you sign up on my list so that you can get the early bird discount. And if you don't want to wait, you can get started today with the self-study program now. What you pay for this will be credited towards the cost of the live program. So why not get started today and start getting relief and clarity? And that's why, for people listening who are struggling with food, every time that you feel bad about what you ate, right? Like you're connecting then to all the other times that you feel like you've failed or that you've lost control. And until you can really see that the food is not about the food in those situations, you'll continue to link with that. And that's amazing. Yeah. Thank you for that. I know that as I work with clients, what we're working on is, the good, bad binary and getting them to x-ray what's really happening. But I didn't understand probably why for all of us, it feels so shameful, right? I mean, we're chipping away at that shame, but that's partly why it feels so shameful is because every time you have go overboard with food or whatever, you're linking to all those other times because most people don't get out of the diet binge cycle. It's because we have poor I don't want to know if we want to call it treatment plans, but poor approaches to it, right? We just fall back on willpower and discipline instead of, no, you've got some unresolved pain and trauma we need to look at.
Yes.
I know. Well, and this is what I loved. In your book, you have a breathwork practice for anger, for resilience, for unwinding. Oh my God, I did the unwinding one after such a cognitively intense day of work. And I was like, this stuff works. I was so excited. How did you come up with this approach? I'm just fascinated. And I love it again, because most of my clients need some structure, but they want that flexible structure. And this book provides that. It's like, oh, feeling angry or, oh, need to unwind. I love it. So how'd you come up with exercises for each state of being that we're feeling?
So the way that I came up with them it's really a hybrid. My methodology is a hybrid based on so many years of studying my breath with myself, with clients, and with a myriad of teachers, studying with different somatic therapy teachers, also doing neuroscience research, and of course, just practicing all the stuff that I'm teaching. My initial background with breathing came through meditation, Zen meditation, and Hatha yoga. And that's where I was introduced to the breath. And that's where kind of early stages of my practices began. So more kind of classical, traditional pranayama or breathing practices. And they've expanded as I've expanded, of course. And also really looking for ways that I could teach the practices that felt more contemporary. I was teaching very classical Hatha yoga for a long time and just felt like I loved the techniques, but the languaging just wasn't quite resonating with a lot of my students, which also makes sense because it's, in some ways culturally appropriated from another country and time. And so we have to look at all those pieces too. And so I was like, how can I just create this in a way that feels really fresh and modern and really accessible? And so it's really a hybrid of all those different pieces. And there are some practices in the book where I talk about, here's the research I did, here's where this practice comes from, or here's a nod to a very classical Hatha yoga pranayama practice. And, giving, respect where it's due, of course. I think that's really important. I didn't just sit there and channel all these things out of nowhere. You know what I mean? They came from somewhere. I have a lot of teachers. And the other thing with the book is that I really wanted that. And when I sat down with my editor, initially it was we were going to do 50 practices. And then I was like, that just seems overwhelming. I wouldn't go buy a book that was 50 practices. I'd be like, how can they all work? That doesn't even seem real. You know what I mean? And that just seemed a little cheesy and weird and not the direction we wanted to go in. And so we were like, okay, great. How can we just narrow this down? And then we're 25. It sounds like a good number. I was like, I definitely have more than 25 practices, but let's just hit on the topics that I'm seeing the most in my life and in the life of my clients, and the ones that I have worked with them for years and have expanded. And the other way that, we structured the book was very intentional, kind of doing all the practices in the beginning and the table of contents, just in alphabetical order. And the idea, I work a lot with oracle cards, right? I don't really know much about tarot, but I work with a lot of these animal decks, and I'll, shuffle my deck and I'll set my intention and I'll pull a card. And it's always like just spooky how accurate it is. But I love the idea of the oracle. And I loved this concept that somebody could open the book and just kind of close their eyes and move their finger down the page. And then when they got to a point where they just felt a hit, they would open their eyes and stop on that practice. And I wanted people to be able to approach this in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. And I mean, Ashley also has a background in art, and it's like beautifully designed. Like I feel like the design embodies the message, which is hard to do, right? Like the medium is the message, but it's such a beautiful book, and you just feel calm opening it. And I'm laughing about like the 50 breathwork exercises, because when I see those articles of like top 50 or top 100, I'm like, oh, I can't even, I think they're saying like, this is a good thing. And I'm like, next, I can't handle it anymore. So one of the things you said you used about kind of what was coming up in your life and that of your clients. One of the things I'm noticing these days is a huge desire for people to want to slow down. It seems like the busy badge of honor is starting to lose its luster. And so what is your favorite practice in the book to help us slow down?
My favorite, there's a few, but I honestly will suggest the unwind practice in the end. And it's one of the most advanced practices in the book, meaning it's, if you're brand new to breath work, it wouldn't be something that I would have you actually start with grounding. So if you're brand new to breath work and you're looking to slow down, start with grounding. And then if you've done some breath work or some meditation or some yoga, start with unwind. And the unwind practice is just like a very quick and easy way to regulate the nervous system. And I have yet to meet a person that it hasn't worked for. It can feel a little odd in the beginning, and it can take some getting used to. But I promise if you do that practice for a few minutes for a couple of days in a row, you will really start to notice a shift. And most people notice a shift after just a few minutes of one practice. But I typically suggest like practicing days in a row. And like you talked about in the beginning so beautifully, consistency and like really showing up for it. So yeah, those are the two that I would suggest. So if you're new, grounding, and if you've been practicing for a little while, unwind.
Okay. And because you've clearly done your healing work and can speak about this clearly, I want to know how you define grounding for people, because it's going to help them.
I love this question. Again, it's like one of those things, it's something that I say and write about so much. And I think defining it is really, really important. For me, grounding is feeling at ease in my body. So feeling at ease in my body.
Oh, I love elegance. It takes a lot of work to get to elegance, people. And one thing I just wanted to circle back again about the book, and I love in your approach, is that I remember several years ago, I used to live in Philadelphia, and one of my favorite yoga teachers there, we were having a feminist chat, and she was telling me how she stopped teaching the Bhagavad Gita because she realized how patriarchal and masculine it was. And I think it's so matrixy because we're looking at these ancient texts, or we try to go to the wisdom of the ages, but we don't realize that most of the wisdom of the ages was still highly hyper masculine focused. And that's why I just love so many women getting in the game, throwing their hat in, whatever. God, I'm even using sports metaphors, right? I don't have like a feminine metaphor for this. But I've kind of been saying, like, I feel like women are putting together, like reconnecting and interconnecting, which should have never been separated in the first place. And men can do it too. It's not, that's a gendered lens, but I just love that you intuitively sense that, okay, I can combine this into something that really, really incorporates the body and has a feminine lens, more feminine, or meaning yin archetype, not female. And now I'm going down a rabbit hole, but do you get what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. And I really appreciate what you're saying, because for me as a practitioner in this space, like there are very, very few female identified folks in the breathwork space as teachers that have kind of risen to a particular level, given all, how many decades of work they've put in, right? It's not just like someone was like, oh, you're a teacher. It's like everyone's been doing work to get to this place, but there are like I look around and it's a very like masculine, men dominated scene, breath work. And so much of the breath work that's taught is like very intense. It's like a lot of it's about catharsis and really like going hard. And, I've had students, especially when I was in LA, that would come out of these breathwork classes and come to my class and be like, thank God, like I just was scared. This guy was literally like, yelling at me to breathe and like scream and feel my pain. And they're just like, that's really intense. Like I'm looking for something that's just like a little bit safer and a little bit quieter and a little bit softer. And again, there's no, I'm not right or wrong and he's not right or wrong. There's so many approaches, which is so awesome. Like there's so many different ways to access whatever it is that we're trying to access. But I was really feeling that in this space as I was building my practice and as I was starting to get press and kind of coming out, and so many amazing people reached out to me and they were just like, thank you for sharing this work in a way that is really, really different, because so many people have an idea about breath work and I'm really trying to disrupt that.
Oh, I love it. I mean, the same in the personal development space. I mean, the week we're recording this, a big article has come out about Tony Robbins being accused of sexual harassment and abuse of victims. And his approach, now changing beliefs and stories is more mainstream, but his approach is very direct. It's very, almost exercise the trauma out of you in a weekend. And just like, I just want people to know there's other choices out there, and that may not be the best for you. And the challenge though is I remember when I didn't even know I was struggling from PTSD from going through cancer, all this stuff. I was attracted to that because it felt so certain and so quick. And that's all I wanted. I was like, I don't want to talk nuance and discernment. I want a black and white answer because that's how I'm seeing the world. So it gets very matrixy. So I'm glad we had this little plug of a conversation for knowing your choices, right? It all comes back to knowing your choices.
Yes.
This is just, since you're super well versed in health, this is just kind of tangential, but you talked about ground and feeling ease in our body. And I know that you used to live in LA where they have like the 5G networks. And I mean, I don't know how well versed you are on 5G. It's kind of this emerging thing I'm learning about. But how do you think all of this Wi-Fi and EMFs is going to affect the grounding in our body? I know that's not I'm just curious. This is more like a philosophical question, a little off topic.
Yeah, it's like totally on topic for me. So
oh, good. I was like, like squirrel.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring this up, especially now that my partner and I have a 7.5-month-old, and I can tell you, watching him just even around the iPhone, and we're really conscious of, especially now that he's here, trying to like, we don't have the phones in the room and like all that kind of stuff. But when he gets around the phone, his energy gets disrupted. And I can see it so clearly in him because he's so new. Of course he's an old soul and, it's probably his like 10th incarnation, but you know what I mean? It's like I can see it so clearly in this little person when the phone is around him, what happens to him energetically and how it disrupts his energy. And to me, that's just like this huge wake up call, and I felt it myself, which is one of the reasons I left LA. It was just, it was too hard for me to be grounded. And I was like, I don't want to have to work this hard to live somewhere. Honestly, that's what it came down to. And that might sound weird to some people, but I was like, I don't want to have this much protection. I don't want to have to do this many like yin yoga practices. Like I don't want it to be this hard. Like I just want to be able to feel what we talked about, at ease in my body without having to struggle to get there. And for me, I'm very sensitive and the environment plays a huge role in that. But as far as the 5G goes, yeah, it's a huge disruptor to our nervous system. And there's so much like coming out about it now. I've been doing probably a lot. We've been looking at a lot of the same things, reading a lot of the same studies. And my partner and I are actually in the process of, and we just got a realtor and we're looking at we're getting out of this little city and moving to the woods next. Cause we're just like, we need a break. We need to just like have a break and like really go full on and just really explore what that's like.
Yeah, I'm from Pittsburgh, but I left for 18 years, thought I'd never come back. But my husband and I were in New York after Philly, and I couldn't articulate it at the time, but we ended up moving back here and we just bought a place. And like the big requirement for me was that we were like right next door to the massive park here. And I go there, it's a forest. I mean, it's Frick Park. It's like miles and miles. But I was like, I think I was craving, like, first of all, I love the East Coast. It'll probably always be part of me, but like a slower pace. But it's amazing how like I just wanted to be near the forest. And I go there so often. And it does the relaxation for me. Like I don't have to try so hard. So I was like, I'll take that ease. And I think this is actually a really great point of when you do the work, you start to get attracted to ease rather than almost afraid of it. And, less attracted to chaos, more attracted to ease. And I think that's one thing I've been doing, even with your book, having the exercises. Now it just makes me conscious to breathe in general. Like even if I'm not doing a formal breath exercise, like even in the forest this morning, I'm like biome breaths. And I'm like, like getting all those good nutrients in them. So you just mentioned your son, Solomon. And for insatiable listeners, I mentioned this on the top of the season 1, but I'm pregnant. And so and we have a lot of clients. I have a lot of clients and listeners I know who are in that fertility phase. And so how did your breath work influence the birth of your son, Solomon? Because I knew from your blog that you had planned on using a midwife, doing a home birth. How did all that pan out? I'm so curious.
My biggest intention with the birth, and I call it our birth because I feel like with Solomon, it was definitely a collaboration of my body and his body, and this birth is a dance, it's this, and it's a relationship. And the day he was born, I became a mother when I was pregnant, but I really feel like that was my initiation into motherhood. And it was it was like any initiation. It was amazing. It was excruciating. It was, all the things that you would imagine it would be. And my biggest intention with bringing him earthside was to stay connected to myself and to him throughout the entire experience. We had a midwife, we had a birth plan, we had all the things. And I said, no matter what happens during this birth, whether he comes out here or we have to go to the hospital or whatever happens, I just want to be in my body. I want to be connected to myself. I want to stay connected to him. And I want to just really go inside and be in this experience and feel every single thing that I can feel with just so much presence and consciousness. And that was not something that I would have imagined my intention would be. Even 5 years ago, it would just be like kind of get him out as painlessly as possible. You know what I mean? Like, let's just get this over with because I'm really scared it's going to be really hard. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just literally speaking about my own experience and what I wanted for myself. And I really wanted to feel my body expand and change and shift and just stretch in all the ways that it had to make space for him to come out. And, the word that I was using the whole time, just my own mantra was just like, stay steady. Like I just wanted to be steady. And I wanted to be so like in the moment when he came out that there was I was just kind of like putting the blinders on. It was just like him and I in this space. And of course my partner was there and there were other people, but I just really wanted that like first moment of connection to be really potent. And I think that is in some ways, especially now, like still seen as like very counterculture and very radical, but it's very natural. It's very natural. Our culture is, we treat pregnancy and birth as a medical condition. And, we view women when they're in labor as they're at this weak point, but actually they're at a really potent, powerful place. And in some ways, I've never felt more powerful as I did when I was in labor.
It's so funny you should say that because I'm friends with Kathleen from, I don't know if you know the Being Boss women, but Kathleen, who's like the co-host, and we were DMing back and forth, and she was like, you'll see how powerful women are, and this is why people are afraid of them when you're in labor. I was like, ooh, I mean, I'm kind of scared, but excited and intrigued.
Yes, yeah, she's right. And yes, I'm big fans of her in their show. But yeah, I felt that. And, I was reading, we talked a little bit before the show started about different books and things like resources that we've been reading and paying attention to and checking out in this new space of being a mother and motherhood and on the journey. And yeah, I was happy to tap into that work and just go, oh yeah, there's this whole thing there's this cultural imprint that I have around like what this looks like. And also the experience that I went through when I was born and what my mother went through. And even though, of course, I don't cognitively remember it at the time, but I still had a very big somatic imprint memory from my own birth. And I really just wanted things to be like done with a level of consciousness and also recognizing like what and being grateful, just so grateful for what a privilege that is. I mean, it's a huge privilege, a huge privilege.
Yeah. And, you know, as you're talking, I'm just thinking about when you can really get things out at the root and regulate your nervous system. And we talked about choice, like you just gave me so many choices and ideas about what I want for my own birth. And I think the more that you work with choice, the more expansive, right? Your ideas get, and the more creative. I mean, I know with my Choose with Food clients, that's a lot of, we're always looking for we call it option C rather than A or B, right? Like lean in or lean out, or wait, can I choose something else? Or this is good or bad, or, you know, discernment. And I think the more we can regulate our nervous systems, the more choices we see. And not only the more choices, but the more expansive and true to who we are and the path that we're on that we can get. So thank you for sharing that, because I just got a whole lot of ideas.
Oh, I'm so glad. And I love what you said about choice, because, and what we've, you know, you've been saying, what we've been talking about in terms of choice, because ultimately that was, you know, a huge, huge piece around the birth too, is that I really wanted to feel empowered and to have choice and, you know, to be conscious. So no matter the outcome, that there were choices, and there were choices that were made all along the way, and that it didn't have to feel like this rushed experience where I'm like, wait, what's happening? Like I wanted to, like we talked about too, really slow things down as much as I could, so that I could have access to those choices. And also so that my birth team knew exactly what my choices were in case I was in a moment where I couldn't, you know, say them out loud.
Yeah, I joked with Carlos, who's my husband. I'm like, okay, we're going to do a decision tree birth plan. I'm going to account for everything, but I'm going to have a choice every step of the way, because I think that's ultimately what's important, is that the choice, you know, if something, whatever happens, is going to happen and you have to surrender. And I want to make sure that my choices are honored, whatever path we go down. So I totally get it. So what are you learning about the power of breath with parenting?
Right now, probably one of the biggest things I'm learning about is how my regulation affects my son. And what I know from just this limited experience I've had mothering, but I've been with him, I've like barely worked since he's been here, and I've been with him a lot and just been very present with him and watching this process. So what I've learned through being with him, and also a lot of the research that I've done, is that what children need for healthy attachment and for healthy development is to have a mom who's regulated, and to have a mom who has support, and to have a mom who has people to help her take care of herself when she's so tired she can't do it for herself. And there's a lot of layers of support that are needed for the mother, and the mother being me, and just, you know, the quote unquote mother of the family, or the person who is carrying the child, the parent. But that role, it's not necessarily even a gendered role, but that role is really, really important and needs a lot of support. And I am learning that the more support I get, the more Solomon feels supported. And it's really wild, you know, because we're kind of taught, this is new for me. This is really new for me, because I've been taught and I've been teaching, and what I've learned is that, right, I take care of myself. And of course I get support. Like that's a huge thing in my practice and in my work. And I'm always encouraging clients to get support from whoever they can, and to have a very robust support network. But I've never seen it so clearly as I have with my son. And the more support I get, the more relaxed he is, the more at ease he is, the happier he is. It's because he knows I'm being taken care of, and that I have what I need. And for him, that's just so life-giving, you know, and that's so affirming, because he doesn't have to then do something for me, right? And so many babies come into the world, and I was one of them, feeling like I had to take care of my mom, right? And there was kind of this unspoken agreement, whether it was conscious or not, that that's what was happening. And I really don't want Solomon to grow up feeling like he has to take care of me.
Yeah, that is, I just keep thinking about the absence of the village that we don't even know we're missing anymore. Right. Yeah. And I keep thinking about for so many of my clients who grew up with neglect, or a mother that wasn't functioning, or even a parent, and how even today, if you can get the support you need, that's healing. You're making new choices rather than taking it all on like you had to, you know, you can make new choices even today. But I love that you shared that, because again, I think it's something that's so natural and that people need, but often it feels like, oh, I should be able to do this. why is this so hard? It's like, because we're missing the village.
I mean, this is literally like every conversation I've had. It's just, and my partner and I are out here in California. We don't have a ton of family around, and we really are in some ways like so far away from that village. And yeah, it's a huge thing. And I didn't even really, it's like I knew that going into it, and we planned as best we could to have meals delivered and all the different things that you do to kind of set yourself up for. At least what we wanted to do is I really wanted to set myself up for the first 2 months. I could just literally be in bed with my baby and not have to cook and not have to go into the kitchen and just be with him and take care of him and heal myself. And I had no idea until I was in it just how much we needed that. You can't, it's like you can know it, but you can't really know it in your body until you're in it.
I know. I always tell people, remember those books in like the early 2000s, like why French women don't get fat. I'm like, you know why they don't get fat? Because they have a social safety net. They get a nurse that comes to help them for the first year. They know that if they take a lunch break, they're not going to be fired. Like, let's look at the social systems that make them feel safe in their body.
Yes.
And no one's talking about that. It's not their scarves. Okay, people.
No, it's really not. It's really not. The other quick thing I wanted to just say too about parenting that I feel like has been a big piece for me, especially these last couple of months now that Solomon is just developed. I mean, babies develop so rapidly. It's just really wild. And, he's learning the things with his body, and he's learning how to crawl, and he's just going through all these like huge developmental milestones. And part of what happens with him, and this is apparently according to our therapist, that we say just very common in babies, and which makes sense. But as they're going through challenges, they can feel like he doesn't get overloaded or overwhelmed, but he gets frustrated, right? It's uncomfortable and he gets frustrated, and he's just trying to like get his right knee forward, and he just can't quite get it. It's like his mind knows that it can happen, but his body just can't get it yet. And so he gets frustrated. And what was interesting in the beginning was I was watching my own impulse, like when he would get and just immediately he would get frustrated, and then I would go pick him up, and I'd be like, oh, it's okay. And I'd hold him. And now what I've been practicing is just letting him get a little frustrated and just sitting with him. Like I'm right there with him. I'm watching him. I'm like, hey babe, I'm with you. I'm here. Like mama's here. She's not going anywhere. I see how frustrated you are. And like, we're going to get through this. And what's so amazing is how much that is expanding his capacity for resilience, because what's happening is he is learning a different way. And sometimes he can't get there, and I will pick him up, of course, and comfort him and do all the things. But other times he gets frustrated and he starts to cry, and then he changes. He does something different. And it's so powerful.
It's so interesting you say that, because my sister got me this book that she's like, all my friends who have kids said they wish they would have read this earlier. And it's called Growing Up Bébé. And it's actually this American journalist living in Paris. And she talks about the pause when you're trying to get your kid to sleep. And like, rather than just rushing in, because sometimes when babies are learning to sleep, they talk, they coo. And if you go in and rush in there, you're actually training them to wake up every 2 hours. And they're like, of course, if they start crying after 5 minutes, then you go in there, right? But as I was reading that book and your book at the same time, I'm like, this is why breath work is so powerful, because rather than just reacting to that impulse to want to, okay, I'm going to help you. Okay, I'm going to make this all right and fix, right? It's like, okay, the breath is going to help me take the pause, and it's going to be better for both of us in the long run.
Well, and like, part of it,
your next book has to be like the breath pause or something like that.
And part of it for me too, especially with like what's going on with the crawling, is that I had this moment, that pause gave me a moment to look at, am I just trying to pick him up because I'm uncomfortable with what's happening? It's like there's so many layers to this, and it's so complex. And then I got to a place where I was like, no, I'm genuinely like wanting to support him. But sometimes like building that resiliency, it's like, and I know this from my own work, it's like we have to like get in the struggle, because the cool thing is once he got that knee forward, he was laughing. He was laughing hysterically. He was so happy. There's joy in being able to do that and get that piece. But I have to actually give him the space to get there and go through that little bit of a struggle so that he can get to the joy and find that within himself.
Ugh, I love that. And that's why your book says 25 simple practices for calm, joy, and resilience. They're kind of a package deal, people. So,
Yes, yes, they are.
so Ashley, if people, first of all, if you want to get started, you guys buy her book, and we will link to it in the show notes as well as a ton of things. But it's called How to Breathe, 25 Simple Practices for Calm, Joy, and Resilience. And what is your recommendation for consistency when we start? How many minutes? You had mentioned about that a little bit before, but wanted to get your expert opinion on just to start. What do you think is good to be consistent with?
I typically suggest people start with 5 to 7 minutes at a time. And again, with the caveat that if, you set your timer for 7 minutes and you've done 2 and you're just like, that's all I can do right now, then be gentle with yourself. Like, gentleness is key, but try to go in the 5 to 7 minute range. And I find that, 5 to 7 minutes is good because it gives you enough time to kind of get the hang of whatever's happening, burn off, whatever thought or thing that's kind of coming up, and then actually get into your practice. A lot of times with more kind of mental meditation practices, they talk about this burn off, right? They talk about that a lot in transcendental meditation. It's like you get like these 5 to 10 minutes of just like burn off before you actually go deep into your meditation practice. But the cool thing about breath work is that you don't need to practice for 20 minutes. It actually will happen a lot faster because you're working directly with your nervous system and to be able to drop down into that parasympathetic state. So it's not a top-down approach. It's actually a bottom-up approach, which is why it's so effective. But I typically will suggest, 5 to 7 minutes to start. If you're brand new, like I mentioned before, start with grounding. It's a really, really good practice for just learning how to feel regulated in your body. And then from there, just kind of explore whatever practice you want. I also suggest in the beginning to pick one practice and try to stick with it at least for a week, if not 2. That way, you'll start to build the somatic memory. You'll build the nervous system imprint of what that practice feels like in your body. And the more you set aside that time for that consistent practice, the more you're going to be able to access the benefits of those practice all throughout your day, right? It's like, I'll have people who say, like, clients will be like, oh, I did it one of your breathwork practices twice and it didn't work. I'm like, okay, wait, you did it twice? Excuse me, what? Like, okay, why don't you try it every day for 21 days and then call me and tell me what happened? And then they go, oh, it really works now. I'm like, yeah, we have to be consistent. We have to do the thing, especially if it's something that we're not used to doing. You're not going to, sit down at a piano and go, well, I tried to play and I don't know how to read music. And so, oh, well, it's like, no, you got to practice, which I know is a huge thing, around what you're teaching too. It's like we have to be consistent. We have to show up and, and you'll see this throughout the book. I am encouraging folks to show up with a lot of gentleness, a lot of softness, and, it doesn't need to be this rigid thing.
Yeah. And I will tell you guys, as someone who's very skeptical of quick fixes and things working simultaneously, I was really surprised at how, I always tell clients life is energy management, not time management. And I was like, well, what can 5 minutes do? Right. But it's shifting the energy in such a dramatic way, and it will give you like at least triple the return on your investment in terms of like you spend 5 minutes doing it, you're going to get like 15 minutes of energy back or at least enough energy to keep going with what you need to do. So I cannot recommend it enough. It's so beautiful to look at and it's so accessible. And again, I love the flexible structure. So you can be in choice about what you want to do. And the structure will help make sure that you feel successful with it. So Ashley, thank you so much for your time. We will link to people to find you, and you do these great gratitude journals on Instagram. I follow you there. Where can people find you online?
So you can find me on Instagram. My handle is at Ashley_Neese. You can also find me on my website, ashleyneese.com. We're actually next month launching the first in a monthly series called How to Breathe Deeper. And it's a live book club class, which I'm very excited about. So there'll be live offerings every month where you can tune in anywhere in the world. And we're going to do a breathwork class and also a book club. So each month we'll have a different theme.
Oh my God, that's amazing. You'll get the power of the group. We need each other, people.
Yeah, it'll be great. My one-on-one practice is like basically full it's been really hard to manage that, especially now with Solomon, and I haven't been able to open up my books in the way that I have in the past. And so I'm trying to do offerings that are really, in alignment with where my life and where my energy is now too. And so how can I expand my offerings? And what you're talking about is so beautiful. The energy management. I'm like, I can't actually see 9 clients a day anymore like I used to, but I can do these 2-hour classes a couple times a month and see like 300 people. So it just makes way more sense.
Yeah. And I mean, in Inc. magazine a couple years ago, they talked about this doctor he was so tired of being able to see like patients for 10 minutes a day. So he got all his type 2 diabetic patients, like 10 of them together, and they had an hour-and-a-half meeting. And he was like, oh my God, it was so much better than seeing everyone privately, because everyone in the group met each other. People knew what questions to ask. The people who didn't know what questions to ask learned what they should be asking. And I think that's what's so powerful about group work. It really can help exponentially. So thank you so much for being here again. And Ashley, and again, the book is How to Breathe, 25 Simple Practices for Calm, Joy, and Resilience. Thank you so much for being here, Ashley.
Thank you so much, Allie.
Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at AllieShapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health and our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.